Hey, Dr. Campbell,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. Well, people are excited. They're jumping on. People have been asking me about histamine and histamine issues. So
Sweden. Wow.
we're glad to. So let's start off with giving people a heads up. What is histamine and why does it matter?
Yeah, so histamine is actually a really important thing in the body. It gets a bad rap, a lot like cortisol and estrogen, because you hear the words antihistamine, so you automatically think you don't want histamine. But it plays a really important role in our immune system. It helps us to dilate our blood vessels and let those white blood cells go in and attack when there's a pathogen there. It helps aid in digestion, and it's a chemical messenger between the brain and the body. So it's really, really important. It's the problem is not histamine. The problem is when you can't break down histamine properly, and then you get too much histamine.
Mhm. Okay, and so some people have issues with too much histamine.
Hmm.
What's the term for that?
Histamine intolerance, or it depends. It's mast cell activation syndrome is a different issue than histamine intolerance, but in my opinion and the opinion of many others, it's the biggest driver of histamine intolerance. So it's either your body's producing too much histamine or you're producing the right amount of histamine, but you just can't break it down the way that it should be, and then it's left kind of circulating through the body and causing these symptoms, and that's when it's histamine intolerance.
And so, can you help us understand what are some of the symptoms that would make you in your clinical practice wonder if there's a problem with histamine?
Yeah, so migraines are really common with histamine intolerance, vertigo, heart palpitations. Like a lot of people will notice when they're eating, or even just tachycardia, where their heart's racing and they're eating certain foods. Flushing. I think we've all spoken to people where you notice they kind of flush really easily, or you're that person, you feel yourself flushing really easily. Different types of dermatitis. Hives, but I don't like to say hives because I think when I say that, people think, well, I've never had hives, so I don't have this. And you definitely can have histamine intolerance without ever having hives. But orthostatic hypotension, like standing up and you get that dizziness, diarrhea. A lot of people with histamine intolerance, they complain, they come to me and they say, I have random bouts of diarrhea, or I have diarrhea every day. I'm trying to think. I mean, those are pretty much the most common symptoms.
And so,
Vertigo too is a really, really
uh,
common symptom.
why does vertigo come with associated?
Well, it's because of where our mast cells, so we have mast cells all over the body. So mast cells are what release histamine. So we have mast cells in our ears. So if we're releasing a bunch of histamine and it's happening in our ears, we're going to get that vertigo. And same with migraines. Like it's, a vasodilator. So migraines come from dilation of our vessels. So that's why people get those migraine headaches with histamine intolerance.
And what kind of foods might trigger a histamine problem for folks who have histamine sensitivities?
All the foods that I love. So fermented foods, which, for so long we've been told to eat fermented foods because they are really, really good for a lot of people. But unfortunately, fermented foods have a lot of histamine producing bacteria. So fermented foods, anything aged, so like aged meats, aged cheeses, even not a lot of vegetables, spinach, avocado, tomato, those type of things, eggplant. But a lot of vegetables are really safe, luckily, because we know, especially with your crowd, we want a lot of vegetables in our diet. But some, fruit like that you would never think would be an issue, strawberries, bananas, anything dried, definitely dried fruits can be an issue. So it's really about the aging of the food and the ability of the food to create this histamine producing bacteria.
And so, we're very keen on having people have fermented foods because of the health benefits.
Yeah.
But I let them know that if you don't tolerate fermented foods,
Yeah.
then by all means take them out of their diet. So,
Right.
you've taken fermented foods away from someone, what are your strategies then to help them have a healthy microbiome?
So I think that, my goal is not to have people on a restricted diet forever because so many high histamine foods are so nutrient dense, like fermented foods and like avocados. So what we really want to do is look for the driving force of the histamine intolerance. Most of the time it's the gut. We have, at this point, I think everyone realizes that gut health is extremely important for so many reasons.
Well, at least in
So,
our
I tend to look for what is, I call it your histamine bucket. So what is filling up your histamine bucket? So let's say you have, a bunch of opportunistic bacteria in the gut that's producing histamine. You have stress, which is, activating your sympathetic nervous system and making you produce more mast cells, which produces more histamine. Um, you have nutrient deficiencies, you have all these things going on. So you really need to look at that histamine bucket. And in my book, Four Phase Histamine Reset Plan, I give you like a lot of
Open
infographics.
up, my dear. Don't be shy. There it is. Beautiful. It's a lovely book.
And look who's on the bag.
Yeah.
You. But I give you it's an infographic of a bucket and all the different things that can fill up that bucket. And so what we do in my practice is we actually find out what's filling up that bucket. We work on emptying that bucket as much as we can, and then you can start reintroducing higher histamine foods and see how you do with them. So it's not, for a lot of people, a lifelong thing where they'll never be able to eat a fermented food again. And even some probiotics, unfortunately, if you can't take or can't eat fermented foods, can actually make histamine intolerance worse. So, I do use specific probiotics while I'm working with the gut that are histamine friendly. And then, like I said, once you can kind of get that bucket empty, you can try to start, reintroducing stuff like fermented food.
So I'm thinking about things like Saccharomyces boulardii and some of the
Mm-hmm.
spore based probiotics with bacillus in them. Such
Yeah.
as, do you have favorite probiotics that you think about, Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, I love the Seeking Health. He's Ben Lynch. He knows a lot about histamine, and he's made a really good probiotic called Probiotic Histamine X. So it's literally designed for people with histamine intolerance. I also really like Megaspore Biotic. I think that those are both, two of my favorites. I do use Saccharomyces boulardii if I'm working with someone with H. pylori or parasites, and that is also okay for people with histamine intolerance. But other than those, I tend to stay away from any other probiotic.
Okay. And how do we, if I'm thinking like, well, is histamine a problem for me? How would I sort that out as a patient?
So, do you want to know how you would test for it or how you would fix it?
So we're going to do two things. We're going to first talk about it from the consumer perspective. So we have
Yeah.
a bunch of folks on here who are probably consumers, and they're thinking like, okay, well, I wonder, could histamine be my issue? What would they do?
So, I have a really easy way. You don't have to pay for expensive testing. What I like to do is I actually have a PDF. It's on my Instagram page, and you just sign in, you download the PDF, and basically it shows you like the highest histamine foods. So you start eating those foods. And if you see your current symptoms getting worse or new symptoms occurring, then you remove all those foods for maybe a few days to a week. And if you start to feel better, it's a really good indicator that you have histamine intolerance. So I kind of walk you through. This is why I created this book, because I know that not everybody can work with a functional medicine practitioner. And so I wanted to make it, I actually made it for two different people, one that is going to work with someone and one that is not. So the first thing that you need to do is remove the highest histamine foods. So I have a yes, no, maybe less. Let me see if I can find it here and show you guys. It's around here somewhere. Okay, so I have this. It's a yes, no, maybe list.
Yeah.
So you're going to remove like the no foods first. And I really like for people to support their liver during this time because our liver is so important for pushing toxins out of our body and allowing our body to accept more than it normally can. And people who have histamine intolerance tend to really hold on to toxins. You know, they're poor methylators. Most of them have a gene mutation that helps them not to methylate very well, so they cannot push toxins out very well. So in phase one, we're removing the highest histamine foods and we're supporting the liver. And then some people have to go deeper. Some people need to start working on the gut. And I tell you, like, what tests to order if you're working with somebody, or if you're not going to order tests, what are the best kind of foods to eat, or things that you could take that can maybe help just balance out the good to bad bacteria type of situation in your gut. And then, working on stress. I talk a lot about stress in the book and talk a lot about methods to help not only reduce stress, but even, so many people with food intolerances and with, a lot of people with histamine intolerance have a lot of issues taking any type of supplements. So then they build a lot of anxiety around that. And it's the very thing that they need to get them better, but they're so anxious about it because they've had a bad experience in the past that they can't allow themselves to try new foods and try certain supplements that could help them. So I talk a lot about, different ways to learn how to retrain your brain and retrain your body to understand and accept things that once may have been harmful for you, but now your body may do okay with.
People are asking about is mold exposure a trigger for developing histamine intolerance?
Yes, yes. So I actually did a big article on this, and I did a video on my Instagram about this. Mold is one of the biggest triggers for our mast cells to, it's called degranulation. So when our mast cells degranulate, they start dumping all these inflammatory chemicals. So histamine is one of them. I have my own really, really bad experience with mold exposure. I was literally pretty much bedridden for about 6 months because of mold. I didn't know that was living in mold. I had no idea what was going on with me. And I had felt really good right up until then. I had worked through a lot of my health issues, and then was exposed to mold. And it's seriously one of the biggest issues I see with histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome, and one of the biggest triggers.
Yeah. And so think carefully about exposures to water damaged buildings.
Yeah.
Construction materials that we have allow for the development of mold on drywall. And
Yeah.
they have mold growing that is not visible. And
Right.
it's a huge, huge problem for us. And so let's get back. So I have some symptoms that have me thinking that histamine might be an issue. I certainly would invite people to think carefully about your exposure to mold and water damaged buildings. And so now,
And it's not just water damaged buildings like in the drywall. Mine was coming up from the concrete. So we had, carpet, and then there was concrete with a split in it, and there was a bursted pipe underneath. We had no idea. I can smell mold from a mile away. I could not smell this. I had no idea. And then we moved the bed and the smell came out. I mean, it was insane how bad it was. But we didn't smell it. It was there for months. We had no idea.
oh, wow. And so what all did you have to do then?
Oh my gosh, a lot. We had to have the pipes fixed, totally, redo the floors. The air ducts had to be cleaned because it gets, once mold is in your house, it's not just in one place. It gets all over the house. I mean, it's concentrated more in certain areas, but you really need to find a good company that will look even within the walls and air ducts and everywhere, because a lot of companies will miss it. They'll just do an air quality test and they'll say, no, it's fine. But there are companies out there that can really find everywhere it is. And then you have to go through a big process of getting rid of it.
All right. And so if we have a practitioner in the Instagram, do you have advice for them in terms of how they can get educated on the issues related to histamine and mold?
Yeah, I mean, I've written about it. You know, there's a lot of information about mold, I think, out there at this point. You know, I like the Great Plains urine test to see what your body, you know, burden with mold is. I also like the Marcon's test to see if it's living inside your nose, because that's happening with a lot of people. And, you know, I'll do those tests on people depending on if I think that, you know, if I do everything with them, you know, work on gut, work on diet, they're not getting better, I'll start going into that kind of stuff. And, you know, with some people, they get better with just getting away from the mold, and some people, they don't. They have to actually do protocols to get the mold out of their body.
And the Great Plains urine test, the nose swab, the Marcons, that's not through Great Plains. Where do you get
No, it's a different company, and I can't think of the company offhand because I just started using them, but they're really great. And they were a very inexpensive test, and the practitioners there are very helpful too for helping you with treatment. But a lot of the times, you know, they'll tell you to use like some type of colloidal silver nose spray, or even have something compounded that can help get rid of the yeast and mold, depending on what's going on in there.
Okay. Okay. So I was trying to figure out where to find this Marcons.
I
Uh,
can find it for you if you can. Hold on one
well,
second.
once you mention it, I know people. I'm going to start getting questions in my customer service, so I need to be able to know how to answer that.
Okay. Hold on, I'm looking. I have it as a little favorite inside my portal.
It looks like we could probably get some information on that with at Surviving Mold.
Yeah, Surviving Mold is a very good website.
Good resource for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so if someone does the high histamine foods for a while to figure out, am I worse? And I got worse, so I took them out of my diet, and I'm following your book on the low histamine approach.
Mhm.
What kind of food am I eating then?
What was that?
If I'm following the low histamine diet now, because I tried your histamine stress test and I
Mhm.
flunked. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
well now I'm going to go on the low histamine diet. How, what kind of foods will I be eating?
There's a ton of food. I mean, you can, you know, basically, I want you to eat animal protein that's just really fresh. So, you know, you can research different companies, and freezing is everything. When you freeze, you do stop the production of histamine. And also, rinsing your meat is really important because it can rinse off a lot of that histamine producing bacteria. So I like Butcher Box, and I'm not even an affiliate for them. I just think that they're a good company, and I've spoken with them about their process, and they really do freeze as soon as they can. So, you know, keeping it frozen, or even if you make food, let's say you make dinner and you have leftovers, just sticking that in the freezer until the next day, and then you can take it out and reheat it real quick for lunch. I do, you know, go over a lot of this in the book. I give so many options on how to kind of meal prep, because meal prepping is kind of difficult for histamine intolerance. Um, but, you know, most vegetables are safe.
Yeah.
So, you know, and there's even, I give a list of high quercetin vegetables. Quercetin is kind of a natural antihistamine. So sage, you know, different herbs. So here's the infographic for that.
Okay, marvelous, marvelous.
Yeah. So, you know, you can definitely eat your way to health. And we definitely know that with, you know, most situations. Sometimes taking quercetin for a little while to kind of calm everything down is okay. And then, you know, once your body starts accepting things a little bit better, you can kind of do it with food. So that's my goal, is to kind of have people get it to where their body is doing it. You know, they can really do everything with food and kind of stress management.
And would we think this will be a 2 month, 3 month, 4 month? How long would the typical person need to follow the low histamine diet?
So it depends on the person. It depends on their driving factors. So some people, this is new to them. It started happening, you know, 6 months ago. They take out the foods, they do it for a month. They start, you know, working on their liver. They start reducing stress, maybe work on gut health a little, and they're better. I mean, this can completely go away. And then there's people like me, I have mast cell activation syndrome. So I always have, with mast cell activation syndrome, it's a little bit different. So it's not with histamine intolerance where under normal circumstances, when there really is a pathogen there, your immune system is sending out histamine. With mast cell activation syndrome, you're sending out histamine with over 50 triggers. So you could smell perfume and you dump histamine. I mean, it can be so many different things. It could be weather changes. You can be too hot and you start dumping histamine. You can be too cold and you start dumping histamine. So you really have to, it really depends on the severity of the, what the driving forces are for the person. But, really reducing the foods, I would say it's around, like my patients, it's probably around 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when I'm usually done working on their gut, which is what I find to be the number one driving force. That and some hormonal issues like estrogen dominance. So, I tend to start working on those things. And then, after that part, you can start trying to reintroduce things. I highly recommend keeping like a detailed food journal so you can really try to figure out what your triggers are. Some foods may trigger you and some may not trigger you at all. And that's why I have a yes, no, maybe list, because the maybe list, some people feel nothing from these foods and some people can't eat any of them. So it's just so individualized. So it's really hard to give like a, timeline on it. But I would say definitely within 1 to 6 months. Like that's about how long I work with people. And then after that timeline, I'm kind of put them on their own. I'm like, this is where we know you are. This is what we know you can tolerate. Stay with this. And it's really all about that histamine bucket. So if you're having a really stressful day and it's, you're sitting in the sun all day, you have all these different things going on. That's probably not the day you're going to eat more fermented foods or more avocado. But then let's say you're having a really great day and everything's feeling fine and you're on vacation or whatever it is, you're going to eat that guacamole, and you're going to feel fine. You're not going to have any symptoms from it.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. So let me check some of the questions that we've had. People were asking about black seed oil.
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Yeah, black seed oil can be helpful. I don't personally use it, and I did not put it in the book, but since writing the book, I have learned about black seed oil, that it can be a mast cell stabilizer.
And how about bone broth? People are looking for bone broth. They can't have bone broth. What's the story here?
Yeah, so bone broth is, again, something we've learned when the whole gut, thing started getting really popular. It was like drink bone broth. Everyone wanted to drink bone broth. But the problem is that when you put bone broth, a carcass or whatever it is into the crock pot and it's sitting there for 48 hours, the more time something is cooking, the more histamine it's releasing, right? So with histamine intolerance, you want to do short cook times, short thaw times. So I actually did put in the book a bone broth recipe, but I just used the Instant Pot. So the Instant Pot is a pressure cooker and it cooks things really quickly. So you can do about a 2-hour cook time instead of a 24 to 48-hour cook time and get the same benefits of bone broth, and you can make, soups and all that stuff. And I just freeze everything. You just freeze it, take it out, and then it should be fine.
And how about a question about EBV or histamine intolerance? Someone apparently is struggling with both issues. They want to know what your thoughts are in terms of in what order should they work on things.
I think that, I a lot of times I'll work on the gut. If I find a patient with Epstein-Barr virus that's active, and then also like dysbiosis, let's say they have opportunistic bacteria or yeast or parasites, I'll tend to work on the gut, but I'm also using stuff that's very good for EBV at the same time, like lauricidin, like something like that. It's just overall good immune support, and and a lot of times I won't have to go into like a full-blown Epstein-Barr virus protocol. But sometimes I do. And so if I finish with the gut and they're still having symptoms and their Epstein-Barr virus is active, then we'll start working on Epstein-Barr.
Okay. There's some people who are not English speakers. I can't address. So dairy, someone's saying that they don't tolerate dairy. Of course, I'm thinking, well, no surprise. I think dairy is a problem. Do you
Yeah,
have?
it's very inflammatory. Yeah, it's very inflammatory, and a lot of cheeses are aged. So the only cheese I have found that does not aggravate histamine intolerance is mozzarella. And, I say occasionally if you want to try like some raw mozzarella, if you can find it, because it is hard to find raw mozzarella, then you should try that. If you feel like you just can't eat anything and you just really need something rich or whatever, then I do give, I think, one or two recipes in my book with raw mozzarella. But other than that, a lot of cheeses do, they're very high in
Okay, and let's see, chromo,
cromolyn.
chromoglycic acid.
It's probably cromolyn, which would be yeah, so that is something that is used. It is a pharmaceutical used for people with mast activation syndrome. And sometimes, people do have to go that route at first just to get their body to accept anything else that they would need to be able to heal because they're just so sensitive to everything. But the thing with any antihistamine that you have to be careful with is antihistamine, they do reduce our enzymes that break down histamine. DAO enzyme is our number one enzyme that breaks down histamine, and like Zyrtec and Allegra, those antihistamines, they do actually reduce our DAO enzyme. So it reduces our body's own ability to break down histamine. But if you have to do it and it's the only way to get started on even anything that you need to take in to get your body better, you have to do it for a short time.
Okay, how about a question about dried herbs?
Yeah, dried herbs can be an issue for some people. I recommend in the book fresh herbs, and I do all the recipes with fresh herbs. Dried herbs have never been a problem for me, but some people can't tolerate them. So I do tend to want you to use fresh. But there's some things that are worse than others, like cinnamon and curry. Those types of spices are going to be much more harmful than something like sage. Sage is actually high in quercetin, so sage is actually going to reduce histamine.
Interesting.
But yes, fresh is better.
And so someone's asking about Hashimoto's. Any reason to think?
Well, a lot of people have both. I have both. So I have Hashimoto's, and that's why my practice is literally like 50% thyroid patient, 50% histamine intolerant, or they have both. So, if you have low amounts of thyroid hormone, you tend to produce more histamine. And if you have too much thyroid hormone, you tend to make too many histamine receptors. So either way, the thyroid does really relate to what's going on. You take a thyroid issue and you take a mutation in the DAO enzyme, you put those two together and you're bound to get histamine intolerance.
Okay, someone's asking about cinnamon allergy. Could that be actually a histamine intolerance?
Yeah, cinnamon is one of the spices that are high in histamine. And that's why in the book you'll notice even with all the apple recipes, because apple is really low in it's an antihistamine, I don't use any cinnamon.
Okay. Would cloves be okay?
Cloves are not. They're in the same class with cinnamon.
And then how about ginger? I imagine
Ginger is actually an antihistamine. So ginger is really, really good. I have a lot of recipes with ginger.
So ginger is good, but turmeric is bad.
No, turmeric is good. Turmeric is good. It's curry. It's curry and cinnamon and like allspice, anything in that kind of category. But ginger and turmeric, they're so anti-inflammatory and they're actually antihistamine as well.
Okay, so that is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other diseases that you think coincide with mast cell activation?
Yeah, POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, is very common. So I have the trifecta, which is mast cell activation syndrome, POTS, and then EDS, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And a lot of people have them, they don't realize it. So a kind of a way to know is When you have a lot of issues with dizziness, you can get exercise intolerance. You go from sitting to standing and you get dizzy, or you get the heart racing when you're eating. And then Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there's a lot of different levels of this. So I always encourage people not to Google it, because when you Google it, it makes it seem like your joints have to basically dislocate for you to have it. But it's really just a connective tissue issue. So if you're very cystic, or you have loose skin, you're more prone to cellulite, or you can see like your vascularity through your skin. And you get a lot of like joint pain and issues like that, where you would think that, other people don't kind of tend to have the same thing as you. You probably have that trifecta. And I actually wrote an article on the trifecta because I want people to understand it, because it really does go together a lot.
Okay, now a question about is cumin and coriander, are those okay, or those
Cumin
problems?
is good. Yep. Coriander's okay. I use cumin a lot. Yeah, I love cumin.
And endometriosis.
So endometriosis would go along with that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so that the connective tissue problem. So a lot of times when I'm taking a history, I will hear people say, I have endometriosis, and then they're describing all these mast cell activation syndromes, and then they're describing their dizziness, and I kind of put it all together, and usually it's that trifecta again.
And I also want to remind people that I also see a lot of endometriosis, like pain. That may be an autoimmune process. So
For sure.
certainly this is where implementing the Wahls diet is a great first step. And then assess, do we have to think about histamine? And so you could do the Wahls diet and do the histamine challenge test that Dr. Campbell's talked about. And if you flunk, then I low histamine foods as well. So people are mourning the loss of wine and vinegars. So let's talk about that. If I'm giving up vinegar because I'm well, what's the acid that I might use for my recipes that no longer
So
use?
I use distilled white vinegar, so it's kind of on a range from like 0 to 3. So distilled white vinegar is like at a 0. Apple cider vinegar is around a 1, and then balsamic and red wine vinegars are 2s and 3s. So those tend to be, more aggravating. The problem with distilled white vinegar is sometimes it's made from grains. So you can find some made from beets, and that I do tend to do really well with that myself, and my patients tend to do really well with it. And some people do really well with apple cider vinegar also. It really depends on the person. So I do kind of go through all of this in the book. I literally list all the vinegars and what types to try and all that, because it's hard. It's hard to make recipes without that stuff, and especially eating salads. It's like, and then lemons are high in histamine too. So it's like, what do you
Oh,
use?
that's great to ask. Would lemon juice or lime juice be an alternative? So,
Lemons and limes can be an issue. I find that limes are a bigger issue for some people than lemons. And so lemons and limes are on my maybe list. So I want you to try them. And if you don't do well with them, you can try the distilled white vinegar and see how you do with that. Most people are okay with the distilled white vinegar.
okay, now let's have you flash that lovely book again, my friend.
Okay.
Okay, so 4-phase histamine reset plan. Lovely book. So that's certainly a lovely option for you. So do drugs like Wellbutrin impact thyroid, liver, or histamine?
Yeah, there's a whole list of drugs that actually reduce our DAO enzyme. Unfortunately, a lot of drugs like Wellbutrin do that. I hate to talk about these type of drugs with people, because some people really have a hard time without them, and I don't want people to feel like they're a failure, or they're really doing something wrong if they have to take them. So I tread lightly on that. But they definitely do come with side effects, and making our body susceptible to more issues is definitely one of them. Fortunately, I think thyroid hormone, especially if it's desiccated, can be a very benign, medication to take. And I really stress this to a lot of people. It's a lot more dangerous to have low thyroid hormone than it is to actually take thyroid hormone. But if you can get your doctor to give you like a natural desiccated form of it rather than a synthetic form, you're probably going to be better off.
You know, people are talking about labs, and you know, the kind of basic labs that I want people to have, and Dr. Campbell, you can expand on this. And these are labs that I think your primary care doc would feel comfortable ordering and helping you interpret. One would be a vitamin D level. And I recommend having your vitamin D in the top half of the reference range. That will lower your susceptibility to viral infections, including both the influenza during the winter and probably also the coronavirus. And it appears to lower your risk for autoimmune issues and mental health issues as well. So
And
know your
it's good
vitamin.
for thyroid too, because a
It's
lot
good
of
for
people, yeah, a lot of people with thyroid issues, especially Hashimoto's, their vitamin D receptors are malformed, so they don't actually, absorb vitamin D as well as people who don't have that. So I always check vitamin D, and I do end up putting a lot of people on vitamin D as well.
And if you're taking a vitamin D supplement, then often people ask me like, well, how much, how much, how much? This is a very complicated question. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on your background and the pigment of your skin.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a Northern European, so I have very pale skin.
Me
So I
too.
go out and I can have my skin make a lot of vitamin D when I live here in Iowa by getting a tan. Some of my friends and neighbors across the street who have dark skin because they're either African American or South Asian, they will have a huge difficulty making enough vitamin D with sunlight, even if they're outside all of the time. So this depends on your genetics. It depends on your skin
Mm-hmm.
treatment. It depends on how much time you can be outside in getting a tan. So if you can get a tan, your skin will make vitamin D. If you can't get a tan because you already have a lot of pigment in your skin, then you'll need a vitamin D supplement. And if you're taking vitamin D, then you need someone to keep monitoring the levels to help you figure out what is the correct dose.
I
Uh,
agree.
and people are asking about the other nutrients with vitamin D. So it's vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K, calcium,
I too.
magnesium,
Yeah.
gravity, lots of gravity, you know, lots of weight bearing gravity, jumping,
Yeah.
leaping, vibration plates, jumping rope. Those kinds of things are really good for you.
Yeah,
Um,
people love those and those little those what are they called? The little trampolines. I have so
yeah,
many patients who use those.
those trampolines are good. There are these small vibration plate exercise devices as well. And again, so for the vitamin K, I like emu oil. For the vibration and jumping, you can jump on trampolines, you can do jump ropes, you could get a vibration plate.
Yes.
Do you get enough vitamin D through cod liver oil? Usually not. Vitamin D with K2, I'd much rather you take emu oil. You won't, the K2 in the vitamin D is typically a synthetic version. Now, the other lab that I like for people to get is a homocysteine.
Yes.
And
Say that.
cysteine between 4 and 7 is a really lovely target. And so those two labs will do very well. I also like to know what your A1C is.
Mm-hmm.
If your A1C is migrating upward, you're heading towards insulin resistance. Uh,
Yes. And triglycerides too, I feel like are a good indicator of that.
yes, yes. And so that can be really helpful. Lipids can be helpful. And Dr. Campbell, what kind of lipid values do you like?
Mostly the small particle, I think that total cholesterol can be a little misleading. People think if they eat fat, they're going to have high cholesterol and then they're going to have a heart attack, which is all, stuff that we learned back from all the, studies funded by the sugar industry. And I think we're learning now that that's not really the case. It's definitely more actually sugar that leads you to that point. But more small particle, looking at that, that's really what's building up and causing the issues with, that could lead to heart attack, I guess, more than just a total cholesterol.
Yeah, absolutely. And so someone into problems with his.
Terry, you cut out for a second. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I think you're back now.
Ocean plate increase histamine release.
Um, so exercise does high intensity exercise and heat do increase histamine release. I don't see that happening with a vibration plate. I have not personally studied this, but I know I've been on a vibration plate and I was not, it was nothing like taking a CrossFit class. So I do not see why that would happen. But I'm really am guessing because I have not studied
Yeah,
that.
is to observe how you respond.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I
if you tolerate it well, then that's reassuring. If you perceive that you are worse with that particular exposure, then I would certainly pay attention to that.
That's what I always say because I talk a lot about exercise intolerance. And I say you should feel good after you do something. If you do an exercise and you feel exhausted after, or dizzy, or even the next day you feel like extra tired, it was probably too high of an intensity workout for you. And I never want people to stop moving. You should always be doing something, but you have to do something where after you do it, you feel good and not bad.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that we can use that for food as well. This is where
Oh, yeah.
a food journal is incredibly helpful
Right.
to pay attention to what are you eating, and what are the ingredients that I'm eating, what are the new, particularly the new ingredients that I've added, and then if I have a reaction, how far back do you suggest people look in terms of
I,
what the culprit might be?
I think I tend to look more for a pattern, so if someone's having an issue, I have all of my patients document what they're eating and when they're eating it and how they felt. And the same with supplements. I have them, I never let them try more than one supplement at a time. I never have them try the full dose. I have them start at a very small dose, one supplement at a time, and document it all. And then if you see there's some type of pattern, especially with food developing, where like they ate this and they felt bad, they ate this and they felt bad, whether it was that day or the next day, maybe even one more day, but you can tend to kind of see like every time she eats sweet potatoes, she feels tired or whatever it is. I don't really know how long. I mean, I would say probably no longer than a few days, but with something like gluten, that can stay in your body for 30 days. So, it really depends on what it is. But if it's something that's supposed to be on your plan, like let's say you're eating, the Wahls protocol, or you're eating a low histamine plan and it is a low histamine whole food that doesn't have gluten, I would say looking back at, a day or two, you should be able to tell.
Yeah, I generally say you want to look back closely for the first 24 hours. You may go as
Mhm.
long as 72 hours. It's very
Yeah.
rare that that's longer than 72 hours.
Yeah.
You might want to think about what you've put on your skin in addition to
Mm-hmm.
what you put in your mouth. Uh, and
True.
I would also encourage you to think about where you've been. If you've been into a new environment, you have to think about, could you have been exposed to things in the atmosphere, particularly the indoor atmosphere of where you have visited. So you might have been exposed to something there. And this is for the more challenging cases. where we have to really sort of dive in to figure out what are those hidden exposures.
Yeah, and even people you've been around, are they wearing perfume? Are they, what do they have on their body that
Yeah.
you're, inhaling? And if I'm around with someone with perfume, I instantly notice. It's still, I mean, I'm way, way less chemically sensitive than I used to be. I used to not even be able to go into stores. Um, and now I don't have that issue anymore. But if I'm around someone with like heavy perfume on, it definitely bothers me. Or if I'm in a
Yeah.
Uber and there's, they're blowing air freshener
Yeah.
in your face, it does bother me, and it can bother you for days. So you have to think about all that stuff.
So people ask you about, and I'll say, you certainly can cure Hashimoto's with diet. We've done so many times in our practice. I'm sure you have as well, Dr.
Yeah.
Campbell. Yeah, so that absolutely can be done.
Yeah.
And then questions about eating gluten. I'll let you go first, Dr. Campbell. Do you eat gluten?
No, never, ever. I don't eat gluten because I see zero nutritional value in gluten, number one. And I also know that it increases xialin, which increases the permeability of our gut lining. And leaky gut can lead to so many issues, especially autoimmune. And so many of my patients have autoimmune issues. So I don't ever eat it. And I really don't allow it as far as people that I'm working with. It's kind of my like non-compromise food. So
Yeah,
yeah, I don't agree with eating gluten at all.
I certainly do not recommend it. If you have any kind of chronic symptom or health challenge, I want my people off gluten and off
Yeah.
dairy. I'll
Yes.
recommend a trial off of eggs. For myself
Yeah.
personally, if I have gluten, dairy, or eggs, I have a flare of trigeminal neuralgia that is quite
Yeah.
horrific. And I mean, um, intense electrical face pain, so difficult that I cannot speak, I cannot talk, um, I can't swallow. So I do not voluntarily eat gluten.
Yeah, and I also say to people with eggs, I always, especially with histamine, I say try the yolk.
Yeah.
The yolk tends to be less of an issue. So when I do eggs, I usually do just egg yolks myself. I
Mhm.
don't eat eggs often. I think that they can be really great for some people, but I also think they can cause a lot of problems for others. So I say try the yolk, and if you don't do all the yolk, then just stay away from it.
And the egg yolk, particularly a pastured egg, really does have some fabulous nutrition in it. So
Yeah,
tolerate egg yolks. It is great nutrition, and I certainly agree. I would just have you go off for a month and then try the yolks back and see how
yeah,
you tolerate them. Um,
yes.
so, Dr. Campbell, this has been really great. I do have another meeting that I'm going to have to go jump on to. Before we go, I'm going to try and scan the questions, see if there are any other questions that we have that we might not have answered. No, it looks like we have gotten them. So one more time, flash that book of yours.
Okay. It's the four-phase histamine reset plan.
This is a marvelous book. And again, highly recommended. I think this is a tremendous resource if you think or you're wondering, could histamines be part of your problem? This will be a wonderful resource. And for everyone who's watching, we have the virtual seminar that we'll be doing for 2021, and Dr. Campbell is going to be one of our speakers, and she'll do another conversation about histamine and helping us figure out how to deal with that. So,
Yes, I can't wait.
Dr. Campbell, thank you so much. This has been great, and I look forward to having you with us next summer.
Thank you, Terry. It was so great talking with you, and thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you much. Bye bye now.
Bye.